What if you could plant your grazing fields in such a way that they didn't need fertilizer at all? Almost every rancher in the United States, and across the globe for that matter, who isn't restoring soil, will tell you that year after year the fields are just producing less edible grasses. And, the few tufts that do manage to grow, well, they're just not as healthy, nutritious, and despite enough rain, they're not growing nearly at the rate that they should. So we dump all of the nitrogen-rich fertilizer that we can afford on acres upon acres of soil using aeroplanes, tractors, and watering systems that, quite frankly, rival the biggest factories in machine power alone. And then we go in with seeds that we sow in the same way, only to do the whole shebang next year again. But isn't it weird that we need to resort to these extreme diesel-chugging methods to get edible grasses growing, when it was growing without any of our help just a few decades ago? Any longtime viewer of this channel will know why this has become necessary, but we'll give a condensed version. Simply put, we've been grazing the same fields year in and year out for over a century. Normally that wouldn't be a problem. As a herd leaves the field, it's supposed to spend a few months to recover, and then it puts out a bunch of new growth in the spring, just in time to feed the herd again. Right? Well, unlike 200 years ago, we've fenced off all of these grazing fields and there simply isn't enough organic material from wild herds of bison and deer coming through, so the soil loses more organic matter every cycle. Every time there's less to eat, the livestock are forced to remove the bottom growth after the topside grasses have been consumed, so now they're ripping out the valuable root systems that are holding the soil and water in place. Then the microbes beneath the soil's populations decrease, and they can't break down what little manure the steers left behind. Empty, sandy soil, erosion like never before, and now we're at the point where we need the chemical aids to put some nitrogen back into the ground, so that whatever seed we throw down at least has some chance to grow, and we're bringing water in where the rain should have been sufficient. But that soil's not holding on to water anymore because there's nothing living in it to keep it in place. To make matters worse, all of that chemical aid is destroying what little microbes were left. And so the cycle continues, just getting worse and worse every year, further forcing us to overgraze what few fields we could afford to fertilize and irrigate. And we all know that overgrazing to these levels is just exacerbating the water retention and erosion problems we already have on our hands. Simply put, we've been causing havoc to the soil for 100 years, and now the chickens have come to roost, so to speak. Before we get into the grasses that can slash your bought-for nitrogen bill down, let's look at some obvious solutions first. Multiple edible food sources for your animals, and multiple species of livestock will give you the most diversity both in their diets and in the amount of manure they're leaving behind. Rotational grazing is another big principle in regenerative agriculture, and for good reason. Firstly, if your rotational grazing schedule is well planned out, there will probably be quite a few weeds, grasses, and shrubs left over that'll spread their seeds for you all on their own. But the seed catalog for grass specifically isn't even close to the only options you have at your disposal. Have a look at the native weeds, grasses, tree and bush varieties that were designed to grow where you live. Besides being perfectly edible and healthy for your animals, they'll require a fraction of the care a foreign species would. That doesn't mean you shouldn't plant the fescue, Bermuda, and Timothy grass. It's just that you need to stop thinking that only a handful of options could possibly make up a full, nutritional plate for your sheep. Do you only eat 5 different kinds of foods for your entire life? Of course you don't. And neither should your animals, or the soil. They need to get their minerals and vitamins from as many sources as possible, just as much as you do. With all of that said, what even are nitrogen fixers? In a nutshell, plants need nitrogen to put on growth. Nitrogen has nothing to do with how nutritious the plant is that grows, it's just the energy it uses to grow. Most plants get their nitrogen from the soil, after microorganisms have broken it down from manure or other organic materials, but it needs to be broken down in the soil before a plant can absorb it. That's why we're dumping chemically metabolized nitrogen on the fields, because there's no organic matter left in the soil to speak of, and certainly no bugs and grubs to break it down either. Nitrogen fixers, on the other hand, don't need to absorb decomposed nitrogen. They've adapted to get their nitrogen from the air above the ground. The atmosphere is made up of 80% nitrogen, so it's not like there's a shortage of how much they can get. Nitrogen fixers have adapted in a remarkable way to do this by developing structures on their roots called root nodules. These nodules are filled with rhizobium, a very specific kind of bacteria that can break nitrogen down into an absorbable form. The plants that are adapted to have these brilliant pockets of nitrogen-producing magic end up converting so much of the nitrogen outside that they end up dumping the excess out through their roots directly into the ground, already broken down and ready for another plant to suck it up. So that species of plant that's been designed to absorb so much nitrogen that it's quite literally leaking out of its roots, ends up leaving your fields monumentally more enriched than any kind of chemical fertilizer could dream of doing. We did a whole video on how the process works in more detail. We'll leave the link in the description box below for you if you want to learn more. Ask any agriculturalist about nitrogen fixer, and their first answer would be legumes. And they'd be right, legumes are fabulous nitrogen fixers. But the beans and lentils aren't the only ones out there that can do this, not by a long shot. Olive and alder trees, sea buckthorn, and azolla ferns are all nitrogen fixers too. And then there's the plethora of edible grasses that we're about to get into. The nitrogen-fixing grasses are a little different from your standard plant adaptation to get nitrogen from the air. Sure, some of them do develop that good bacteria-filled sac on their roots, as would be expected, but others don't. Instead, they play host to the bacteria that breaks nitrogen down in their bodies or even just in close proximity to their roots. Rhizobium isn't the only bacteria that can break nitrogen down. There are plenty of them that do this, and they just like cozying up to certain plants. Think of it like a symbiotic relationship. Without the specific species of plant, the bacteria couldn't survive, and without the bacteria, the plant wouldn't survive either. But at the end of the day, they still do the same thing, and leave behind the same amount of nitrogen that the legumes do. Alright, we've harped on about the what's and the whys for long enough. Let's get into the reason you've clicked on this video in the first place. What are the nitrogen-fixing animal fodders that you can plant? We'll be listing grass species and other edible weeds, shrubs, and bushes that fall in this category, because like we mentioned, the more variation you can get on a field, the better. Alfalfa, also known as Medicago sativa, is honestly one of the most well-rounded animal feed options out there. It's actually more of a bush variety than a grass and, well, not a lot of folks realize that it's part of the legume family. I mean, we can't really blame them. You wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at it, now would you? By nature, alfalfa leans toward hot and dry climates, and truth be told, it doesn't tolerate frost all that well. But we've come a long way, selectively breeding it to become a bit more cold resistant. So just be sure to have a look at the different strains out there and pick the type that best suits your climate. Seriously, you need alfalfa in the fields. It's just so nutritionally dense, packed with all the lysine and protein your livestock could ever need. Honestly, animals could eat nothing but alfalfa their whole lives and be perfectly healthy, including those picky horses, heavy-feeding hogs, dairy cows, and even the fowl species. Alfalfa is nothing short of a powerhouse, both as feed for your animals and as feed for the soil. Next up is clover. Clover is a great cover crop to lay down in the final months before the snow sets in, when it's just too late in the season to plant a food crop in time for harvest. Besides keeping valuable roots in the ground and keeping it snug for winter, which helps avoid snowmelt erosion, it also gives the soil a good amount of organic matter to work in when spring comes around. And with all the nitrogen it dumps out of its roots, you'll have more than enough to get you going for that first spring planting. But it really should be planted among other grazing grasses and shrubs. They companion well with other more aggressive growers, since clover's a pretty aggressive grower itself. Clover shouldn't be given to livestock on its own because too much can cause bloat in cattle. But that's exactly why it's so good to interplant between other feeds. By spreading out these low-growing nutritional bombs, your animals can't overdo it thanks to all the other options at their disposal. With that said, clover is high in all the amino acids and just stuffed with more minerals and vitamins than we have time to list. Honestly, it's the best thing you can feed your milk producers and animals that have recently given birth. It helps repair birthing organs and replenishes the blood. Now let's talk about vetch or Vicia species. Hairy vetch can be used as forage for livestock, but you really need to get your timing just right. While it's high in protein and can be grazed or fed as hay, its seeds do contain toxic compounds that can be poisonous to livestock. So, you need to harvest it before it hits the seed-bearing stage. That makes it better suited to plant about 30 days before the frost, so you can harvest it during its immature stage, and then add it to your hay or other winter feed storages. The roots and nubs stay in the ground after harvest, leaving behind all that nitrogen and green matter you need for grass planting when the weather turns warm again. So, you're getting ground protection, nitrogen, and extremely high protein feed all in one go. Sure, we know that vetch isn't exactly the kind of thing you plant for free grazing, but at 36% protein and all that extra life it adds to the ground, you really shouldn't pass up the opportunity to add it to your soil. Bird's foot trefoil, or Lotus corniculatus, is honestly the solution to getting something worth eating to grow in already ruined soils. Originally from North Africa, this low-growing yet highly nutritious plant was made to thrive in terrible soils that just don't hold water well. And you know, it doesn't care where you put it, shade, full sun, no rain, or even lots of rain. Throw at it whatever you want, bird's foot was made to survive. Unlike the other legumes, bird's foot can be consumed in abundance without causing bloat at all. Since it grows so low to the ground, it doesn't compete with higher-growing rye, oats, and other grasses. So yeah, it can also be planted among other hay options, and it's just added whole to the bales as an addition to other grasses. Besides the 22% worth of crude protein and plenty of fiber, it's also loaded with tannins. Bird's foot is perfect for fields where they can be left to their own devices without much input from you. If allowed, they'll reseed all on their own and bring more and more nitrogen every time the season turns. Lespedeza, more commonly known as Japanese clover or bush clover, is a fantastic plant to replenish soil that's been underperforming. Actually, it's one of those fodders that can grow just about anywhere, no matter how little it has to work with. It barely needs any nutrition in the ground to get going, and when it does, it fills up the space nice and high, giving other grasses and creepers a chance to seek shelter under its nitrogen-loaded branches, where there'll be more water for them to grow. Its roots go very deep into the ground for a bushing sort, meaning that you'll get some much-needed root structures for optimal water retention, and a place for the microorganisms to create their own little ecosystem in. Besides all of the expected protein, tannins, and minerals, bush clover also treats intestinal parasites very well. It's important to note that it is invasive. Once it's in, and if not properly managed, can turn into a problem, so seed with care. Fescue isn't exactly a nitrogen fixer, but it pairs with other legumes so well that you'd be a fool not to add it to the mix. Highly digestible and very palatable, the livestock just love eating it. But you need to be careful about how much they're getting in. If they eat too much of it, they can develop something called fescue toxicosis. Now, before you panic about your cattle getting sick, it's a perfectly edible grass that's perfect for bulking up feed. It's just that it absolutely needs to be grown with a wide variety of other feed. That makes it perfect for rotational grazing. But there's another reason we put it on this list. Fescue is one of the few cold-tolerant grasses that grows with the minimal amount of care and in the worst soil conditions. They're some of the best deep-rooted grasses that'll keep your soil protected from erosion when the winter freeze starts melting, and everything is just hankering to wash away with the melt. This is a bit of a controversial grass, so let us know your first-hand feedback in the comments. Lupins, or Lupinus species, are part of a wide family within the legume scope. There are over 200 different subspecies within this group alone. Now, looking at most of the variants, you'd think it should be more of a decorative plant, especially during their flowering stage when they put out a wide variety of colorful blooms. Just don't plant them along your fence line, or you'll have half the herbivores in a 5-mile radius coming by to have a nibble. The three main grazing varieties are the white, blue, and yellow lupins, but please don't let those be the end-all and be all of your lupin options. We just mentioned those three because they're very easy to grow and are readily available. And well, we couldn't possibly cover all of the 200 separate species separately in just one video. The sweet varieties are all safe for animal consumption, whereas the bitter varieties have high alkaloid levels and require some processing before they're consumed by animals and humans alike, so just keep that in mind. But regardless of what species you settle on, all of them come with 50% worth of protein, and like all legumes, are packed with all of the other nutrients you need in forage. They grow fabulously in dry, arid, and depleted soil. Give them just a bit of water and some nutrition, and they might just take over the whole field before you know it. Luckily, the white, blue, and yellow lupins all make great hay and silage, both dry and wet. So you really can't have too much out in the field. Then there's their deep roots that give all of the protection and organism shelter you're after to get your soil full of life again. Sainfoin has to be one of those grasses that all of us have heard about. It grows easily, it doubles as hay, and just about every species of livestock loves it. Its protein content is comparable to alfalfa, but it comes with a little more tannins and some parasitic fighting attributes to boot. It's probably the most cost-effective grass on our list. Seriously, just throw some seeds down and walk away. It likes the arid heat well enough, but it can still remain standing long after the first frosts come. So there's virtually no limit to where it can grow. And just to sweeten the deal even more, honeybees and all of the other pollinators love this deep-rooted plant too. Ryegrass isn't a nitrogen fixer in any way, but they grow so well among other nitrogen-fixing forages that we just can't not mention it. You see, ryegrass has many variations, some suited for the cooler climates and others for the drought. Some are perennial, some are annual. They're all super fast growing and very no-nonsense, honestly. And that's what makes rye so fantastic. It'll fill whatever niche you need it to. If you're moving your livestock, often due to restricted space, annual rye grows fast enough to make the rest time shorter. If you're returning to a field on a seasonal or monthly basis, well then, the perennials will reseed and spread far and wide to fill up the field to the brim. It's just such a good filler fodder. It's got a little protein, a bit of nutrients, and a whole lot of carbohydrates and fiber. The heavy feeders like hogs and cattle just need a feed that can fulfill their high caloric needs to keep up with their fast growth and the immense amount of fat they need to build up. It's the kind of candy that the heavy feeders just can't get enough of. They love it. Peagrass is another one of those wide spectrums that come with a lot of variants. Some vine up onto the higher growing plants, some grow more like grasses, and others creep along the ground. They're all part of the major pea family, and anything in that section of legumes can be planted on the grazing field. And when we said that rye was like candy for the cattle, it's nothing compared to peas. They're so sweet and delicious that animals will spend days actively seeking for it among the other edible stuff growing around them, which gives you an unexpected advantage. Any kind of livestock needs to be entertained. An empty field is asking for bulls to tussle, goats to find another escape route, and for pigs to cause havoc. Boredom is asking for a broken fence, but give them low-growing peas to look for, and that treasure hunt's going to keep them occupied wonderfully. As expected, peas are much like all the other legumes: tannins, proteins, minerals, fiber, and highly palatable. You're going to select which kind to plant based on your climate. It's not like there's a shortage of options for you to choose from. For such a delicate-looking plant, all the peas have surprisingly sturdy and deep roots. The animals don't bother rooting down to get at them, but they do strip down what's growing topside. But that's exactly what you want. All of those nitrogen-filled roots to break down and feed the soil for the next sowing, while keeping the integrity of the ground intact as well as serving as a nesting place for the worms and the bacteria that need the shelter. Our favorites of the lot have to be bush clover, lupins, sainfoin, rye, and all the pea varieties. They just give you so many nutrients and of course nitrogen that would make them top of the list just on those factors alone. But what really brings them across the finish line is that they are easily adaptable to almost any climate, simple enough to get going. And they all have deep roots and leave a great deal of organic matter behind, regardless of how heavily they were grazed. It's not just about getting naturally occurring nitrogen into the soil, it's about repairing the ground too. And these 5 top picks go the farthest to improve soil year after year. Even if your first planting isn't all that great in your terrible soil, the year after will be better. And the year after that, better still. Just keep going, keep your bag of seeds as varied as possible, and let the results do the talking. You'll never look back, that's a promise. These are only our top 10 favorites. What about some of the others you've been growing? You know the drill, let us know all about your top picks in the comments down below. And while you're at it, why not leave a like and subscribe to the channel too? We really couldn't do this without you. See you next week, cheers!